Hello and welcome. Today we're making rosaries that have beads with eye holes. So like these starfish are connectors, they have two eye holes. And then these angel wings, they just each have one, kind of like a medal, like if you had the miraculous medal or something, that little eye hole at the top. So there are a lot of ways to do this. I'm going to show two ways. So this will be a little bit different because I'm going between the two that I'm doing. So the starfish obviously is different because it's one-sided and it has two eye holes. It's a connector bead, whereas the angel wing is two-sided and it just has the one eye hole at the top. Bead numbers, you're going to need 53 Hail Marys, you'll need 6 Our Fathers, and 1 centerpiece bead, and 1 cross or crucifix. You may also choose to use spacer beads, and the numbers on that are going to vary. So for the my St. Michael the Archangel themed rosary, I'm anticipating using 60 spacer beads in addition to the Hail Marys and Our Fathers. For the Starfish one, I used 106 because I was actually using 20 little spacers per decade. That's because I wanted to alternate colors. So I have this Hail Mary has 2 blue beads next to it. This one has 2 yellow, and so I use a lot of spacers that way. For this one, I'm just going to have 1 spacer between each bead, but then I have some extra spacers because I'm also putting a spacer bead on either side of the Our Father bead. So that's where I end up with 60. So this one I already started, and I will show for the starfish one, I'm going to show you some parts from that. So for that one I had ended putting the crucifix and the beginner beads on. In this case, just like in the starfish, I have 2 3-wrap beads here where I connected it. Then I have a spacer on either side of my Our Father wing. I have the spacers, the red are the spacers and the black are the Hail Marys in this case. So I have 4 spacers and 3 Hail Marys. I have another knot before I put on my next Glory Be or Our Father bead here, and I have the 2 spacers and then another knot, and now I'm ready to connect the centerpiece. In terms of cord length, that's also going to vary depending on the size of your beads. You should be able, most likely, be fine with less than 10 feet. In this case I've used 16 feet, but I had a lot left over after the starfish. So I'm going to connect this on with a 3-wrap knot. So I pulled it through, now I'm just finding my end. I put the end of the tip of my finger here that's holding it, so I'm like pinching it between 2 fingers, and the one that's not the end, so I had the end of the cord here. This one is the other part of that, where I'm going to wrap it around down my finger 3 times. So 3 wraps there, and then this end that I had brought there and wrapped around, that's what I'm going to be pulling through to then tighten down the knot. So this will be how I'll do all of the knots. And you might choose to wait until after you've made the loops to put the end through. That's another option. So I'll tighten this down. Get these 2 knots close together and tight. Okay. Then I'm going to cut this end. And like I'll do with each of the knots as I go through that I cut, I'm going to put some nail polish on it to help seal it so it doesn't fray. And it's also helpful to put nail polish on the end of your cord, or you could use glue, like from a glue stick or liquid glue. If you let that dry, then it holds together better as you're going through. I'm going to take the end that is not wet with nail polish and attach this metal, so pull it through. And I'm going to do a 4 wrap knot here. It's up to you how many wraps you want to do and how many knots in each place to make sure it's secure, and also just to get whatever look you're going for, because it's also going to space your beads. Make sure it's good and tight. And I do have a little bit of a loose end, so I'll cut that off. Nail polish it, and then I'm going to be ready to string my decade. So I'm going to start with a spacer bead. In this case I'm using red for my spacers and black for my Our Fathers. The spacers are usually smaller than the Hail Mary beads, but they don't have to be. So now I have my spacers and Hail Marys strung for the first decade, so I just alternated spacer, Hail Mary, all the way down, ended with a spacer. And I'm going to do a 3 wrap knot, so I'm getting my end here to be ready to do my Our Father. So I have the end pointed at the top, pointed the same direction as my finger. I wrap 3 down, pull through. I'll tighten that down, leaving a little bit of wiggle room, but not a lot. And then I'm going to put a spacer on either side of the Our Father. So in this case I'm using the clear beads. And then I can take my Our Father, and it's 2-sided, so I can just string it on. And then I can put on the other spacer on the other side of it. Now the Starfish, as I'm about to show you, so I'm going to show you the process of making that one right after this, so you can see the difference for when you come to the Our Fathers. So in this case I have a knot right before the Our Father spacers, and then I'm going to have a knot right after it. So I'm going to do another 3 wrap knot, and then I just keep going with the same length of cord. So I don't cut it, I just knot it, and then I keep going all the way around. The only times when I cut it are when I come to the center bead, and that's the at the beginning and the end, where so 3 wrap on either side, and then I'm going to continue stringing my decade right after that. At the beginning, this is one piece, like before I get to the center bead, so I tie it and cut it off, and then I started this length as I already showed you, and then when I come around to the other side, I'll tie it here and then cut it off. So those are the only times when I'm cutting it for this one. For this one, I cut it a lot. So every time between every Our Father is a separate piece. that is knotted on, and I'll go ahead and show you that next. At the end of each decade for the starfish, put a knot after stringing all of the beads for the decade. Put a knot at the end to hold the beads secure. There's a knot here. There's the yellow bead, and then there's a little bit of a space, and then the knot holding the beads on. And then with the starfish, I have to be careful to make sure when I put it on that it's going to lay flat. So I'm going to have each of these the Our Fathers going around the whole rosary, and I want to make sure it's not like some are backwards and some are forwards, because these are one-sided beads. So I just have to be careful of that. When I string the starfish bead on, I'm going to put another knot to attach the bead. So there are 2 knots at the end of that decade. So I have this, stringing this on here. Okay, so it's going to lay like that. So I find my end. Shorter lengths could be used for this. Instead, I'm using the whole length as I go through each, but each decade is a separate piece in this case, so I really don't have to be using such a long cord, but I just keep using the same one and then cutting off from it. So I have the end pointed up, and then I'm wrapping around and down, so I just have to keep it from getting tangled up for each time. And then I'll pull that end through and tighten down the knot. And I want this knot to be very close to the other knot. So once I have that tight, you see there's 2 back-to-back knots. So again, there's the knot that I tied to hold the beads on, and then there's another knot that I tied to hold the Our Father on. And then I can just cut that. And I'll nail polish that. So keep it secure and keep it from fraying too much. This cord that I'm using is not typically used for making rosaries. I wouldn't normally recommend using it, but in this case I wanted it for the look of it. But it's there's a thin wire inside it, and then the I don't know what you would call that, like the gold, it's not really like foil, but kind of like that, and the cord are on top of that wire. It frays really easily. It's not easy to work with, but it does look nice, and then the wire makes it more secure. So then on the other side, I'm also going to do 2 knots, even though it doesn't seem as important to do that, because I'm putting the beads on after the star in this case, the starfish. But I'm still going to do 2 knots because then it'll match everything else. And then it's also secure, I think, of in the event that it were to break, then you wouldn't necessarily lose the Our Father and the whole decade. Maybe you would just lose one of those pieces, but ideally, it won't break, but if it's used in the rosary for a while, it could. The piece break. Okay, so I'm knotting this on the same way I did the other knot, just on the other side here. Tighten that down. Okay, and then I'm going to do another knot before I start the next decade. So we have our little knot there. We have our end, and again we're wrapping down the finger 3 times, pulling through. And depending on how I do the knot, I may need to cut the little end off that I just, what was left from tying the knot on the starfish. But if this knot effectively covers it, then I won't have to do that. Just kind of depends how it goes. It's a little bit of fuzz stuff on here. So yeah, cut that a little bit. There's only a tiny bit sticking out. Just be careful if you are cutting that you don't cut the knot itself. I'll polish it. And then it's ready for the next decade going forward. So now at this point, the Starfish Rosary is the final decade, ready to connect to the centerpiece. So this one I am just going to connect it directly. So at the beginning I had done a knot and then started the beads, and then I just added a 1 loop knot to connect the center. That was really just because I had forgotten. So a lot of times when I'm making the rosaries, I'm not using an actual center piece, but in this case I am. And so you want to start with that, but ending with it, you can connect it just the same way as the starfish, only in this case, and it's up to you how many knots you want to do, how big you want them to be. I'm just going to connect it directly, and I'm going to do a four wrap knot. So like if you were making a knot rosary, this would be the equivalent of the Our Father bead, because usually the Hail Marys are 3 wraps and the Our Fathers are 4 wraps. But I'm going to go ahead and do a 4 wrap knot to connect the centerpiece. So I wrapped it down 4 times. And then what I'm going to do, so I have this wrapped 4 times, I'm going to take the end and I'm going to put it back through those 4 loops. So I'm going to go up So I wrapped down my finger. Now I'm putting it through up to tighten it. Then we'll have that knot right there holding the centerpiece on. Make sure it's nice and tight, so it'll also match the other side and be secure. And then I'll go ahead and cut that off and put some nail polish on. So then when you're doing the crucifix and the beginning prayer beads of the rosary, that's a separate piece. So you're going to connect it on the same way to the centerpiece. I'll just use the other end that I didn't just put nail polish on to connect that. And I'm going to do just like with the other ones. I'm going to do another wrap it 4 times. In this case, I can go ahead and pull my end over so I have my 2 ends together just like I'm doing a normal knot. Wrap it down 4 times. And pull the end through. Okay, so that's nice and tight. I'm going to cut that little end off and put some nail polish there. And then I'm going to do like I've done before and put on one of these starfish. So I'm going to knot it on this end and then cut it and then knot on the other end and then continue on. So I put the Starfish Our Father on here. I did these Hail Marys. This has 2 3 wraps just like with the decade. Same here, 2 3 wraps, 1 for the beads and then 1 to put on the starfish. So now I'm ready to do the crucifix. So I'm going to do a 3 wrap on this other side of the starfish. 3 wrap knot. And then I'm going to put on the crucifix. And this is going to be what I've been calling a backwards knot. So I have the crucifix looped on here, and I'm going to wrap around 3 times. So wrapping this 3 times, and I'm also moving this just so it's out of the way each time, so it's not in the knot. And then I pull through the end. And tighten it down. Okay. Make sure that's nice and tight. And cut off some of this little like fuzz from the cord fraying a little bit for that other knot. I'm going to use the nail polish as usual. Okay. Okay, so here we have the finished Starfish Rosary and the finished St. Michael the Archangel Rosary. And I realized as I was making this that when I did the count at the beginning of spacers, I'd left out a decade, so it would actually be 71 spacers on this one, and still, 106 on this one, but that's going to vary a lot depending on if you decide to use spacers and how many it makes sense to do for the rosary you're making. On a completely different note, just because recently was in a race called the Selfless Elf 5K, and every year they give out different colored striped elf socks. What I found interesting about these, so these are this year's, so blue is the color for this year. They match the breviary for Advent and Christmas, so if you have the full set of the breviary, if you're not just doing it online, it matches, so that just I thought was pretty fun. Anyway, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, happy rosary making.